All right. The assignment is a compare and contrast essay. Probably one of the more, in my experience, people have found this essay quite challenging, but it's a good way to help you develop the critical thinking skills needed for the next level, for your movement towards or entrance towards post-secondary life. Here we go as follows. It is WFA number 2, compare and contrast essay, Streetcar Named Desire. Compare and contrast Blanche and Stella. How are they similar? How are they different? What do we learn about Blanche by contrasting her to Stella? 500 to 750 words, a 4-quote minimum. Now, before we start, I want to make sure you understand between compare and contrast. I think when people see compare and contrast, they think it's similarities and differences, and it's true. However, it's true for a certain part of it. When you compare something, you look at how it's the same and how it's different. Okay? So for example, let's say you decide to get a new phone. And you're wondering if you're going to, let's say you want to look at either an Android system, a phone that uses Android, or a phone that uses iOS, right? Apple or an Android phone, or let's say Apple versus Samsung, right? And you're trying to determine what's going on. When you compare them, you're going to look at how the phones are the same, where features have the same, and the phones are different. That's the meaning of the word to compare something. How are they the same? How are they different? When we contrast something, we look at the differences and try to understand what the differences tell us about the individual products. Okay, so I'm going to use the Apple example again. I'm going to compare an Android phone with a Samsung phone, and I want to see certain things that are similar and certain things that are different. One of the differences is their ability to be customized, right? Apple phones do not customize. It's set up in a certain way. You can't really mess around with it. That's it. Android phones are open source, which means you can do almost whatever you want on the phone. It's not controlled or locked down by a system like Apple. When I contrast those two differences, I've learned an invaluable thing: that Apple is more concerned with security and making sure your phone works than Android phones, right? Which means they're willing to limit your experiences with the phone if they can provide a phone that's stable and working and has very few problems, right? On the other hand, Android phones are more concerned with the individual experience of the customer. That they're saying we are willing to allow people to use open source to put anything on our phone because we want our customers to understand that we want them to design their own experience versus us creating one for them. That's a contrast, right? I've learned something about those two companies and those two companies' values. One is security, one is individual access or freedom or ability to control something, right? And you see that in most of Apple's products that they're very focused on the idea of control, right? They do not like when they create a system, they create an ecosystem, and no one can penetrate it. But Android phones are completely different. I've contrasted those two things. So when we do a compare and contrast essay, we're looking at this part. How the same, how they different. That is the comparison. What we learned about Blanche by contrasting her Stella, that is the contrast. So we're doing two separate things. Okay, just so everyone knows what's going on. The learning goals are reading. Again, you're learning how to read and understand from the plays, and writing, which is gathering information, creating outlines, using feedback to improve it, and using editing, improving your work, using your knowledge of spelling and grammar, and sense of paragraph structure to refine your essay for publication or for marking. When I'm going to assess this, I'm looking at specific things. Number one, under knowledge and understanding, I know and can identify at least two differences and two similarities between Blanche and Stella. Conversation. Now later on, I'm going to, in success criteria, we're going to look at some notes and we're going to look at how you're going to develop those notes. So you'll have to do some thinking about how they're the same, how they're different. You will be given maybe a sample or be given an example of, hey, here's a similarity and here's a difference. Under thinking, use of planning skills. I know that I need to use 4 relevant quotes minimum in my compare and contrast essay. Only 1 quote can be a sentence long. And again, after the break, we're going to go over how to write and how to insert quotes into your paragraphs. But the idea is that you need to have proof to establish what you say happens in the book. The relevancy of the quote means the quote should explain or show what you said about what you're talking about in your essay is correct. Meaning only 1 quote can be 1 sentence long. In the past, sometimes people give me quotes, they're only 1 sentence long, that do not give enough detail. I'm not saying all your quotes need to be paragraphs long. I am saying that only 1 quote of the 4 you chose, a minimum of 4 you chose, can only be 1 sentence long, and a sentence should be really good at explaining what's going on. But again, I'll talk more about that later when we're looking at how to write an essay. Next, I know I must create a clear statement within my first paragraph that provides an answer to the statement. What do we learn about Blanche by contrasting her to Stella? So that means the essay is really looking at that as what we're supposed to learn. That is your thesis statement. That is what you're going to prove. What do we learn about Blanche by contrasting her to Stella? Remember, in this play, Blanche is the protagonist. She is the main character. Stella is either a large minor character or a small major character. Her role isn't really, we're not really looking at her as an examination of the roles of women in society. She is there to illustrate how things went bad for Blanche, and she is there to show how things go really bad for Blanche when she eventually abandons her sister to support her husband. Next, the use of creative and critical thinking process. I know that I must contrast Blanche and Stella in order to discuss if Blanche is able to adapt to her environment. This must occur in paragraph 4. So again, we're going to talk about this. And one of the things we're going to talk about, compare and contrast, is that when we contrast these 2 ladies, these 2 women, we notice that one is able to adapt to a new environment and one is not. And in your 4th paragraph, you're going to talk about that concept of adaptation and what does it mean, right? What are the messages we're learning about adaptation? What are we learning about people who do not adapt and do not change with an environment? Next part is expression and organization of ideas and information. So I can create a compare and contrast essay using proper spelling, grammar, sense, and paragraph structure. So gotta follow the rules of grammar, gotta spell things properly. Next, I know my essay should be clear, use clear, easy to understand language, which means write simply and clearly. Do not use overly complicated words that you don't know the answers, you don't know the definition to. Write it clearly so that it's easy for the audience, which would be me, to understand what you're saying. Even if you're trying to explain a difficult concept, use the most direct and simple language possible to convey that information. And the last part is, I know I have to follow the writing process, which is outline, rough draft, and final draft, along with the title page using MLA format in order to complete this assignment for evaluation. This assignment must be done in front of my teacher when possible. So same deal, you gotta be doing the different stages, either in class or outside of class. You have to show me where you are on each stage. I need to see an outline, I need to see a rough draft, and again, you submit the final draft. If you don't use me as an editor, fine, have someone else do it, but then show me that Luke went to Fred and asked Fred to edit his essay as outlined, and then Fred edited the outline and made notes and then give it back to you, right? Because when this was a non-COVID, when you had non-COVID years, some of the kids would go to Fred to edit, and Fred would edit the paper, but then come to me and say, hey, well, so I told Ivor to do A, B, C, and D. Is that correct? And I say, yeah, but you should really focus on D. Yeah. And he goes, yeah, I got it. And then, so I know that Ivor's going to show me that he's done an outline or he's the observation part, because He's done it with Fred. Fred's given him notes. Ivor shows me the notes he's given him, but also Fred speaks to me and says, I saw Ivor do this, and I think Ivor's on this track. That's observation. So any of those aspects, everyone, is a way that you would demonstrate what's going on, right? So make sure you do that, because that would show observation for your CTA. I'm sorry, for this assignment. That's all assignments from now on, right? Have someone set this up again. Make sure you're doing this with me or someone else and you document it so I can look at it later. Okay, I'm going to switch shares to talk about the success criteria. If I can find it. Can you see this? Someone seen a change of document?
Yeah, it's success criteria.
Oh, excellent, good. All right, so remember the success criteria is how to do the assignment. If I'm not around, if you're working on the weekend, if you're working on it at night and you want to know what to do, these are the steps in order to achieve the goal, right? So the goal is to gain a greater understanding of Blanche. Find the similarities and differences between Blanche and Stella, compare. What do the differences teach us about Blanche, contrast. Learning how to write a 5-paragraph academic essay. Let me be clear. I am concerned about Blanche's growth. I don't care about Stella's. This essay is not about finding out about Stella. This essay is about examining Blanche. Stella is a tool to learn more about Blanche. So in the past, when people write this, they sometimes will focus on, or they will want to talk about Stella. That's not the purpose of Stella. Even as a character, she's written and designed so we know more about Blanche. Because remember, they both grew up in the same house. They both have the same parents, but they both reacted differently to this changing environment. She's there to show us, hey, Blanche could be like Stella, but doesn't. And why isn't she like Stella? Because Stella changed, why can't Blanche? So remember that, we're not focusing on Stella. We're truly to have a greater understanding of Blanche because she is the main character and is the focus for this work. Okay, so remember that, it's important. If you watch this video again, I will say it again. I do not care about Stella's growth as a character. This essay is an examination of Blanche's growth as a character. Okay. So step 1 is read the novel, read the play. Read up to scene 9, you can finish the play as well. So what I'm telling you guys from now, just read. Keep on reading the play, don't stop. If you can finish it, great, but don't stop. What I mean up to scene 9, which means that you can use I want you to read up to scene 9 because you can use any of that information from scene 1 to 9 in your essay. You don't have to, you can focus on some of the earlier scenes, but be aware that if you say something that contradicts later in the play, I'm going to point it out in the outline, right? So reading up to scene 9 provides a good level of information to use in your compare and contrast. Again, you could read up to scene 6 or scene 7 and still be able to do a great compare and contrast essay. Just make sure it doesn't contradict things that are going to happen within the play. Right? And again, if you're struggling, watch the movie. The only difference between the movie is how they initially all meet, the fact that they don't ever meet, 3 things: how they all meet. So they go to the bowling alley instead of Stanley comes home, or Stella hangs out in the apartment. Also, the fact they never mention the fact her husband Alan is gay because it's 1950s, and the ending of the play when Blanche is raped by Stanley. Stella just kind of goes off with Stanley and just lets her sister go. In the movie, she grabs the baby and says, "I'll never go home to him again." In the movie, they imply that the bond that Stella and Stanley have is broken. Okay, and that's because they said they couldn't have Stanley rape someone and get away with it in that movie. Okay, so step 2 is conduct research. Identify similarities and differences between the women, right? You want 2 of each. Now, here, because I've done this assignment several times, I have given everyone 1 similarity. And again, when I give you the other notes that we're going to talk about, you'll see that as well. So 1 similarity is they're both raised in the Old South, which is a genital tradition. Women must be courted by men, class-based system, defined by gender roles. You are to find another similarity. How are they both the same, right? And people have said the numerous things that make them the same. Does anyone want to hazard a guess what other they have in common are the same? I mean, if I tell you that I'm pretty much giving the essay, but there is other things that they share in common, right? So you need to find another similarity. I've given you one. You can use that one. You should use that one. You must find another similarity. Now, 2 things that are different. And I'm asking 2 questions here to get you thinking about 2 things that are different that you could use for your essay. 1, do the characters have different opinions on their appearances? Does one character care about their physical appearance? Right? So think about that in the play. Is one character more concerned, even obsessed about what she looks like at all times? Second, do the characters have different opinions on Old South, the gender tradition? Does one character hold on to the traditions of the old past, of the past? Does one character want to sort of maintain or go back to the time of the Old South? And has one character decided to move on? Right? These are things that I'm giving you that when I worked on with other students, these are the points that you should use for your essay. And you need to gather information from that. We look at contrast. In the contrast section of the essay, you must discuss what the reader learns from looking at the difference between this Blanche and Stella. Focus should be on adaptation. Which character is better able to adapt to the new world? So part of the contrast that others have found in this section is when we contrast these 2, when we look at the difference of these 2 sisters, one big thing happens to be pointed out. One is able to adapt to the new world and one cannot. That's a huge difference, or a huge contrast. And what do we learn about that? How are the differences we've talked about proof of the fact that one sister is able to let go of the past to move on and adapt, while one sister refuses to adapt and is stuck in the world she used to live in? Okay. For each point, find a quote that supports it, which means you have to have evidence from the play that shows me what you said is true. If I said both women are raised in the Old South, and they've been courted by a man, class-based system, defined gender roles. If I said they both, because they live in the Old South, they both share those common values, I would find a scene in which they share similar values. For example, I know in scene 8, they're all having dinner together, and Stanley's eating with his hands. He's eating chicken with his hands and he's being very sloppy. And Stella tells him to wash his hands and clean his face because you're acting like a pig. And Stanley gets very angry and tells Stella later, you know, you've been talking to me like that a little bit too much. And the words coming in your mouth sound a little bit too much like your sister. Well, they do because they grew up in the same household and therefore probably have the same ideas about what to eat, how to eat, how to behave at a dinner table. That's an example of evidence that I would find the quote and then explain the fact that, hey, this is why Stella kind of yelled at Stanley about his behavior at the dinner table, because she grew up in an era where that's not how you behave at a dinner table. Okay, so that's an example, but again, I'll go into greater detail of finding evidence. And the first thing you're going to do in preparing for this essay is you're going to do an activity that's going to help you gather a bunch of quotes and know which one, and then you can determine which ones can be best used for your essay. Okay, step 3 is the breakdown of the outline structure, right? You've got the first paragraph introduction. Remember, you always go from an essay, the most general terms to the specific terms, right? So in general terms, here's an example of a general term statement. To understand one thing, we compare and contrast it to another. Then we briefly describe the points that we're going to discuss in this statement. Guys, give me a second. I'm just going to pause. I'm getting a call. So then you would briefly describe the points you're going to discuss, which means you're going to talk about how two things that make them the same, two things that make them different, and then you see the statement, what you're going to prove. It must answer this part of the question. What we learn about Blanche by contrasting her to Stella. So you could say, when contrasting Blanche to Stella, we learn that Blanche is blah, 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 blah. Don't talk about Stella. I don't care about Stella. Stella is a tool to learn more about Blanche. Okay? Second paragraph, you're going to compare similarities. You compare the two similarities of each woman. You're going to follow the state co-explain structure, which I will explain after the break. Then you have a transition sentence, which means a sentence that connects one paragraph to another. So it could be something simple as, while Blanche and Stella have many similarities, they also have many differences. Then you go to the third paragraph. You compare the two differences of the women. Again, you're going to use the same state quote-explain structure, which I will talk about after the break. And then you have a transition sentence. Again, by looking at the differences of the women, by contrasting the differences of the women, we learn something very interesting about Blanche, right? Then you say, what do the differences teach us? You state quote-explain, and then you talk about, then you have a transition sentence that talks about the conclusion. Your conclusion, you restate thesis and apply it to another subject, which is, why is it important to adapt? If the big reveal is that Blanche can adapt to her environment, why is that an important lesson to learn? What is the author talking about when he creates that character? Is adaptation an important human skill? If people don't adapt, do bad things happen to them? These are the things you would apply, because your essay kind of comes down to the fact that Blanche can't adapt. How can you apply that concept to something outside of the novel, right? So you could talk about, like, when animals don't adapt, if things don't adapt, they die. You would talk about when people have done this before, I've always said, why don't you talk about the failure of BlackBerry? How it was a company that was a smartphone company. It was the first smartphone company. But because they refused to adapt to the changing way how smartphones were being developed by Apple, they failed. They died, right? They exist, but they don't exist as much as they were. At a certain point, they had complete control of the market share. Now they have very little, right? And when you look at other smartphone competitors to Apple, like Samsung or LG, they all adapted to the little glass boxes with touchscreens that we all use. They all abandoned their physical keyboards, but BlackBerry did not. No adaptation, you're dead. Okay, so that is pretty much the breakdown of the assignments plus the success criteria. I'm going to stop the recording now.